Welcome to Moments with Marianne. This is your host, Marianne Pastana. And we're here today with special guest, Lindsay Fauntleroy. And she's here to share with us her new book, In Our Element, using the 5 elements of soul medicine to unleash your personal power. So welcome to the show, Lindsay.
Hi, thank you so much for inviting me. I'm excited to be here.
Oh, what a joy it is to have you here, Lindsay, to talk about your new book. I've got to tell you, once I picked it up, I could not put it down. I just love this book.
Thank you so much. That makes me so happy to hear.
So, what inspired you to write this?
Well, I started writing the book because I've been teaching. I've been teaching flower essence therapy. I've been teaching 5 element theory. I'm a yoga teacher. All of the practices that are in the book, I've been teaching for quite a few years. And so I wanted a reference text for my students. And then as I started writing it, I realized that I wanted something that really captured my love of working with nature in this way. There's so many books that are very clinical and very, especially when we're talking about East Asian medicine, they're very clinical, they're very acupuncturist oriented. And I wanted something for my patients, for my friends, for my family that really captured the magic and the mythology of these elements and then brought them to us in a way that would be very practical in terms of the healing that I think the world is calling for right now in terms of emotional healing and soul healing and healing on the places that we can't necessarily touch with modern medicine, but going to a deeper level of heart healing, and that's where this book comes out of.
You often hear that people who have different type of elements is really kind of emotional and spiritual stuff that they're bogged down with. Do you find that to be true?
Absolutely. I find that our body is a continuum. And so our emotions play a big role in what's happening in our body. Our thoughts also play a big role in what's happening, and not so much in a linear way. I don't want to create a or be part of a paradigm that says, oh, I got sick because I was thinking negative thoughts or something like that. But there is synchronicity and there are patterns. And that's what this medicine, East Asian medicine, is so wonderful at helping us to decode. It's these symptoms that feel very unrelated in our body and these thought patterns that we have and these emotions that we're feeling. And then when we look in this medicine, we see that those things are all very much related through these archetypes of nature. And once we land on which element is up for us, then we can really start to shift things, whether it's on a physical level, but certainly on an emotional and spiritual level as well.
So, I know you talk about soul medicine. What is that?
So I think about soul medicine as any medicine that touches the places between our spiritual life and our physical body. And by that, I mean, we all have different spiritual practices, maybe different religions or different things that we do on our own to connect to our source, our creator, the universal wisdom, so many different names for that spiritual connection. And then on the other end of the spectrum, we have our physical bodies. We have the doctors that we see. We have our exercise regimen. We have our dietary protocols. And then there's this in between space that is dealing with the frustrations of life, our goals, our inspiration, our aspiration. And so soul medicine is really to touch those places, to touch the places where our thinking or our perspective needs to shift, or to touch the places where we're stuck in an emotion that we really can't move through. We're stuck in grief, we're stuck in sadness, we're stuck in frustration. And so soul medicine is for those places. So it's not a replacement for spiritual practice. It's not a replacement for our physical care, but it is a bridge. I see it as where we can find a connection in this in between space.
So, how do the elements intertwine with all of this?
So the elements, and again, there's many systems of elements. We see elements in astrology, there's elements in Native American traditions. And so the system of the elements that I work with are the 5 elements of East Asian medicine and acupuncture theory. And I see these elements as a blueprint or a template. So we can look at each of these elements. We have water, wood, fire, earth, and metal. And for each of these elements, there are these signatures. And by signatures, I mean when a particular element wants our attention or has some healing available for us, we might see it in certain physical symptoms. We might see it in certain thought patterns. We might see it in an emotional impulse. And so the elements become this system that we can look at all of the symptoms that we're experiencing and see what the through line is, see what the archetypal through line is. And then that element will also teach us what we can use for our healing. And in my work, I look at acupuncture points, of course. I look at different yoga practices that can stretch the meridians of each of these elements. And then I look at flower essences that might have some healing as it relates to the core soul messages of each of these elemental impulses.
How did your soul medicine journey begin?
Oh wow. It started when I was in my early 20s and I was told that I could not have children. I was diagnosed with something that they called premature ovarian failure, which thankfully they don't use that phrase anymore. But I wasn't in a position to do IVF at that time. And so I was really distraught about it. And one of my friends introduced me to the flower essences. And working with the flower essences, I finally felt some ease in my heart, some joy again after being really devastated from the diagnosis. And in that process, I also was introduced to acupuncture and yoga and all of the things that I talk about in the book. This was really my initiation into all of those practices because sometimes, and I find this to be true in my clinic as well, that it's the biggest setbacks or the biggest heartbreaks that inspire us to seek out other ways of healing because it's that important, and so for me, that was my fertility. I really wanted to have a daughter. I really wanted to have a child, period. And so I just immersed myself in all these healing arts. And I was amazed by how accessible they were. I was amazed by how much I began to shift even before I got pregnant. And, thankfully, my daughter is a teenager now and she's vibrant and healthy. And I'm so grateful for her. But even before I had any inclination that I was going to actually be able to have a daughter, I started to feel a realignment with my own path and a sense of well being that transcended what my body was doing and transcended what I thought I wanted for my life. And I see that come up again and again in my practice where we come in to get healing based on what's hurting. And then in the process, we can transform into ways that are beyond what we started working on to begin with.
That's kind of where the miracle happens, right? So
That's where that beautiful quote, the wound is where the light enters you. It's that's the place.
what a great
Place.
quote that is. I know that we were chatting about the elements. So how do we determine which element we are?
I love to walk through a 4-step process for figuring out which element has something to say. And the first element, the first question in that exploration is really what's going on, right? What is the thing that is calling for your attention? What is the area in your life that feels stuck? And really getting clear about what it is that I want to shift. And the reason that first step is so important is because all of these elements have these healing gifts. Right. And so we can access them at any point in time. They're all wonderful. They all do great things. So it really becomes that first step of wait, what is it that is keeping me up at night? What is it that feels like it's the right time to shift? What is it that is either breaking my heart or inspiring me right now? And once we land on that, that's step one. And then step two is tuning into how does that feel inside of us when we think about that aspect of our life? What emotions come up? What emotions are flooding over into other areas of my life? And the 5 element system has within it a beautiful system of organizing emotions. And so each of the elements has a core emotion that it's associated with. Water is associated with fear and every variation of fear, including anxiety. Wood is associated with anger, which includes frustration and rage, and also just those little minor irritabilities of getting annoyed. And then fire deals with love and connection. So when we're not feeling that sense of love and connection, we can turn to the fire element. The earth element teaches us about resonating with others and being empathetic, and even sometimes taking on more emotions than we should, and micromanaging and trying to control others because of how interconnected and codependent we feel. And then finally, the metal element is has grief as a signature, and the sadness that comes when we have to let go of something that we cherish or find precious.
Are you finding that a lot of people are working with the grief element right now?
Oh my goodness, so much grief over the last 2 years, really. There's so much of shedding and letting go. And what's lovely about this medicine, again, coming back to that quote, the wound is where the light enters you. Each of the elements also has its gifts and its signatures and its higher truths that it helps us to learn. And so with the metal element and its grief, it also teaches us how to value the present moment and to be in the now, to not think about what might happen, to not think about what did happen, but to really and truly honor the preciousness of this moment. And so I've seen both. I've seen so many of us, myself included, navigating grief and loss and surrendering and letting go. And then from that place of emptiness, also seeing the beauty that still remains. And it's that dance of honoring what we let go and being present to what's precious that the metal element helps us to realize.
So I know in your book you've got all these great, quizzes and resources for people to really kind of hone in on where they're at. And so let's say someone's got a really high score in like their work, but
Hmm.
maybe their physical health is ailing or their finances are.
Right.
What do we do once we find that information out?
I think that's a great example because it shows us where there's those signatures start to show up. So, from the example that you just gave, I would say, if a person is dealing with some physical stuff in their body, and then also dealing with some financial, all of that stuff really points to the earth element because the earth element teaches us how to navigate our circumstances in the physical world, right? It's very down to the substance of life. And so we would maybe start by working with the earth element. And in the book, I give some guidance in terms of finding those lessons and those soul lessons and where to start. And we would maybe start with a pose or two, a yoga pose or two, and an affirmation that reminds us that we have the ability to manifest our ideas, to manifest our vision in the physical world. So maybe that's having a clear vision for what I want my body to feel like, or a clear vision of where I want to be attracting my abundance from, the kind of life work that I want to do. All of that we would get really clear. And then with the earth element, also get really practical about what are the steps to get there. And that's how these elements kind of weave in and out of our experience.
I love a quote you have in your book by Octavia Butler.
Oh my goodness.
Oh my God, that's amazing. Can you share that with us?
So that quote is from one of my favorite books by Octavia Butler called Parable of the Sower. And in it, one of the very first things that the author says is everything you touch, you change. Everything you change changes you. And so this idea that really comes out of, I would say, indigenous psychology about how everything is energy and everything moves and flows. And there's no one thing that we can do that doesn't affect something else. And there's no thing that's happening out in the world that doesn't have some influence on ourselves. And it really relates. There's a alchemy quote that I often hear in the wellness circles that says, as above, so below, as within, so without. And it's this same idea of what we see outside of us is reflected inside of us, and what's happening inside of us is also reflected in the outer world. And those two things are in dynamic relationship with one another.
That's now one of my favorite quotes too. So I'm going to have to pick up that book and read it. I mean, you had so many just great like nuggets of wisdom within your book, and
Thank
you
you.
touch on and you touch on so many points that people are like, well, wait a minute, what's that? Or I've never heard of this.
Mhm.
Earlier, you talked about flower essences and flower therapy. So, what is that?
So, flower essences are very similar to essential oils. So, essential oils we might use topically to that have a beautiful scent that may be relaxing or energizing. And so, flower essences are also a form of plant medicine, but rather than using them externally, we take them internally as herbal supplements. And so, the flower essences are based on a philosophy that everything in nature has something to teach us. And each of these flower essences unlocks a particular truth or understanding or helps us to embody a particular understanding. So, for example, there's a beautiful flower essence called impatience. And as we might expect, impatience is for when we're feeling like we're rushing too much or that other people are moving too slowly. And so, because of other people moving too slowly, we might feel a little bit impatient. And this flower essence, when we work with it, it really teaches us to slow down and be in the present moment. So it's one of the flower essences that I talk about in the chapter for the metal element because of its quality of teaching us from the inside of how to be in the moment. And that's what's beautiful about these flower essences is that as we're working with them, it just awakens this inner truth from our own intuitive self. So it doesn't feel like there's something artificial happening. It doesn't feel like we're under any kind of influence. We just awaken and become aware of this authentic truth that is coming up for us within the context of whatever it is we've decided to work on for that cycle of soul work.
Now I'm going to put you on the hot seat a little bit here.
Uh-oh.
That's okay. It's okay. So I know we've had a lot of people that have gone through COVID and have
Right.
lost their sense of smell. So how does
Ah,
flower essences, does that still work for them? Or if you can't smell it, forget it.
that's the best thing about them, I think in this context, because they don't have a scent. They are preserved with brandy, so they smell a little bit like brandy, if I'm totally honest. But the flower essences, because they're ingested, because we put the drops in the water, water that we're drinking, or we can put a few drops under our tongue, we really don't absorb them through scent as we would with an essential oil. It really is through the science of sympathetic resonance, which basically means that when we're taking in an external vibration, we ourselves start to be in harmony with that new vibration. So I think about it like a tuning fork, if that makes sense. An example that I give in the book is that for those musicians that are out there listening, if you have two guitars in a room and they're perfectly pitched together, if you strike the C string on one guitar, the C string on the other guitar is going to start to vibrate as well. So that's the sympathetic resonance. So with the flower essences, they each have a vibration, and those vibrations align with thoughts or feelings that we have. And so when we ingest these flower essences through water, whatever is out of sync, whatever is out of pitch in our thoughts and emotions begins to harmonize with this new vibration of the flower essence. And that's what awakens these new insights, these ahas, these epiphanies, or even sometimes just feeling an emotion begin to ease and shift and move into a new place.
So let's say somebody has a mental health condition. How are
Mhm.
the flower essences used for that?
One of the things that I talk about in my training programs is really not using the flower essences as a replacement for medical care. So I always give that disclaimer and that caveat because they are a self-help modality for passing moods, emotions that are stuck, but when we're still able to basically navigate our lives. And so, what I often see in my practice, if I have someone that is dealing with, say, clinical depression, for example, I might work in tandem with their therapist as they're moving through the depression and use the flower essences to help create some deeper awareness into what's going on that is leading to that state. So, for example, for some, and this is why, again, I love the East Asian medicine system because depression has 5 different ways of showing up for us. It can show up as not having enough energy or fatigue, or often in my practice, I see it as a depression that comes from not being able to um, move forward into our greatest self as we envision it. And so that would tie it to the wood element. And so if I'm working with a flower essence, the person may or may not be on antidepressants. It's really their choice in between themselves and their doctor. But either way, we can work with the flower essences to support them in getting insight into what feels stuck, what feels like it's not moving, what feels like it wants to shift and change and grow and blossom. And so, in that way, the flower essences are working in tandem with whatever other practices we're doing to support our mental health and mental wellness.
Now, do you have a flower essence story that is a personal story for you?
I have so many, so many personal stories. One of them that I love is my story of working with the wild oat flower essence. And I bring this flower essence forward because I feel like it is one of the flower essences that has really played a pivotal role for myself and also for my clients through this COVID era of re-examining and sitting in the unknown, and it, for many folks, making a pivot in terms of their career choices. And so with Wild Oat, I remember I was working in the nonprofit sector. I had just had my daughter. I had just had this amazing transformative healing experience. And I wasn't sure what I wanted to do next with my life. I knew that I didn't want to keep working in the nonprofit world. I knew I was ready for something new. I didn't know what it was. And so I started working with the wild oat flower essence. And wild oat is a flower essence that helps us to realign with our purpose and with our path. And one of the ways that flower essences speak to us is through synchronicity. And so here I was working with this flower essence, and I got this little intuitive hunch that said, you really love acupuncture. Maybe you should go to acupuncture school. And so I said, okay, great. And I thought that acupuncture school was a summer training or weekend training, something I could do while I was doing the rest of my life and being a mom. And I looked up acupuncture programs and learned that it was a graduate degree and that it took, several years and thousands upon thousands of dollars. And so I decided, no, I'm not going to acupuncture school. It's not for me. And was working with this wild oat, and it kept coming back and it kept saying, no, you really should look into this acupuncture school thing. And it just turned out that one of my favorite authors in the acupuncture world was teaching at a school that was not far from me, and they were having an open house. And so I went to the open house, and on my way to the open house, I was saying to myself, well, I'm just going to look and see and listen, but I'm not going to acupuncture school because I don't have time and it's too expensive and blah, blah, blah. And then when I got to the open house, I felt this sense of certainty of, okay, I'm doing this. This is happening. I don't know why. I don't know how, but that's the kind of synchronicity and forward movement that these flower essences evoke. And so, of course, as the story goes, I ended up going to acupuncture school and then 10 years later writing a book about acupuncture theory. And it's just been such a realignment with what I think I'm supposed to be doing here, at least at this point in my life. And so the flower essences, if I had listened to my own limiting beliefs about what I thought was possible for me, I would have never stepped into the life that was actually what I was supposed to be living.
Well, I'm so glad you did that. My goodness.
Thank you. I give a little special thanks and shout out to Wild Oat Flower Essence. Thank you, Flower Essence, for helping me get out of my head and into my heart.
Do you see that a lot with your clients too, where they're at this point, this like fork in the road, and that a flower essence tends to help them make decisions?
I do see that a lot. What I see more often is that we're kind of socialized to make decisions from our head. That's what I see more than anything. And then when our heart is wanting something else, we feel this impasse. We feel this stuckness of, I don't know what to do. And so, what I find that the flower essences, as they did for me and as they do for a lot of my clients, they help us to really tune into our heart center and to see what's there. And not only to see what's there, but to also honor it, to listen to the heart's wisdom, to take a leap of faith in some cases, or to find forgiveness in places where we didn't think we would. That's the kind of miraculous healing that I see. If I were to give it a name, it's that place of getting out of our rational mind, our logical mind, and into our intuitive feeling self, and to honor what's there as we integrate that with our logic and reason.
I would love to talk about your education because I know you developed a PhD. And what did you study, and how is that related to the work that you're doing now?
Well, I am still working on my PhD coursework, and what really drew me to going back to school again, besides being super nerdy and loving research and reading clinical studies and things like that, is that I realized that there is so much out there in terms of indigenous healing, as a African descendant, diasporic healing, and the different systems that have been used from the beginning of mankind to understand the psyche and to understand our place in the world, and what different cultures have used to understand and organize those things. So definitely, when I think about classical acupuncture theory, it was initially a psychological system before, or I shouldn't say before, but as much as it is a system for healing the body. So that's one indigenous system of psychology. And then there's different spiritual traditions that come out of the African worldview that are also very much archetypal psychologies. And then you have Western Jungian psychology or depth psychology. And so I got really interested in the intersection of these worlds and how they're saying the same things, but using different language, but often using the same symbols. And often those symbols are connected to nature. And so my PhD work is really looking at these different traditions and where they support and inform each other, where they differ from each other, but ultimately, how do they serve humanity now in terms of helping us to step forward with more clarity, with more vision, with more interconnectedness, with more healing than what we've had in the past.
It seems the Western world's been a little detached from a lot of this indigenous knowledge. And it's just so interesting, the information that's out there. When you were doing your research, was there anything that really surprised you as you were going along?
I think I'm constantly in a state of surprise and wonder and uh, the inquiry of it all. I know one thing that stood out to me when I was doing a lot of my research was seeing some of the connections between African spiritual traditions and East Asian medicine. That was something that I wasn't necessarily looking for, but I was really inspired by. Now, as I deepen my work with depth psychology, seeing so much of the correspondences between the different systems and the work with symbols, I think I'm just always amazed at how much the human psyche and soul has been trying to understand its place in the world since the beginning of time. I think that just always blows me away a little bit. We've been trying to figure this out for thousands upon thousands of years, and here we are still going, trying to better understand our place in the world.
Do you feel that your work that you're doing, your book, and all the great research that you have is really also helping other Black and Brown people to be able to feel like, hey, this is probably a career choice that I have never considered, but something that would be great for me to do as well?
I hope so. And I hope so from a place of the more of us doing this work, the better. I definitely had my moments where throughout the past few years, there's just been a lot of hits on the human heart. I think that's safe to say. And so I've had my own moments of overwhelm, of feeling like I wasn't playing a big enough role. And speaking to my colleagues who are therapists or body workers or energy workers, and all of us in this space of feeling like there's more healing that needs to happen in the world than we are ourselves capable of doing. And so when I founded the Spirit Seed, which is my educational institution, it was really from the perspective of how do we help more of us to do this work? And whether we're doing it professionally as a practitioner or whether we are just the person that everyone in our family calls when they're in crisis, that we all have a role to play. And so I definitely think that um, representation is important to me as a Black woman, and being very intentional about being able to see myself in the work, see my community in the work, see my patients in the work, and also really understanding that it is each of our responsibilities to take this work, this healing, and I don't mean necessarily my work per se, but this healing work and bring it into our communities in the best possible way because we all are heart aching. And so that's been really exciting to see in the Spirit Seed in the school of how students will take the 5 element theory or the flower essences, and they have their own clinics, and that clinic may be in a very similar community as my own, or it may be somewhere completely different. And we come back and we share about how this work is shaping and healing and supporting those that we love and care for.
Seems to me when everyone has a seat at the tables, that's when we've got these great ideas that come forward that can really benefit everybody.
It really is this idea that knowledge is co-created, that we heal in community, that it's really coming out of a paradigm of individualism that says, what can I do? Or how does this affect me? And into a space of what can we do together? And how does this affect all of us? And that's been a beautiful remembering. I think that that is the way that humanity used to see itself in the world, and seeing us come back to it with the support of some of the technology, right? So the internet, the all of the different ways that we're able to connect across state lines, country lines, oceans. I think all of that is part of the remembering of how we used to experience ourselves as interconnected, and now we're being interconnected in newer ways, but it's a old medicine in a new world, which I like to call neo-ancient.
Which we all need, we need
Right.
that now, more than anything,
We do, we do.
We've got a world in chaos that needs a little help, and
Oh,
it's interesting. So when we have discussions like these, I really feel that it helps to give people opportunity to look at possibilities because there's so many
that's right.
possibilities that you bring to the table.
Thank you. And what I love about this medicine is that I kind of say get in where you fit in. You don't have to do all of the things. It's the book is not meant to be a prescription. It's meant to be an invitation. And so some of the practices might really resonate with you and some of them might not, and that's okay. You can really jump around. You can pick and choose what works for you, and what works for you today might be different than what works for you next month. There's really an invitation there to bring a spirit of play, to bring a spirit of experimentation, and to bring a spirit of inner work to it so that you can find what works for you and then add to that and then share what you've added to that. And that's how this medicine is co-created, and that's how it grows, and that's how it becomes relevant in this time.
As we go back to the elements, kind of touch on that. I was really kind of taken with the wood element because there's so many lessons learned there. And the one that really stuck with me was the reaction versus response. I'd
Oh,
love for
yes.
you to share that because I think it's a lesson we can all learn right now.
Oh, that is definitely the wood element is very close to my heart always. And so the wood element, the core emotion that's associated with the wood element is anger. And in general, I think it's pretty fair to say in this country, in the US, there's an adverse relationship to anger. And what we often see in spiritual communities and emotional wellness communities is this notion of transcend your anger, rise above your anger, don't be angry, move towards forgiveness. And all of that is beautiful in the appropriate context. But what we learn through the wood element is that there's two different aspects. There's the energy of the wood element or the energy of anger, which actually rises and brings a good metaphor is it's this force of the wood element that brings a sprout out of the seed and into the sunlight. So there's this upward movement. That's the energetic of of the wood element. And then there's what that upward movement is trying to shift and change and break through. Like that sprout is breaking through the soil, it's coming out of darkness. And so when we think about the reaction versus the response, it's that same metaphor. So there's the energy, which is going to be the reaction, which can be healthy or unhealthy. But the reason for the reaction is to move the energy to honor that upward movement, that trajectory of change. And so our reaction might be any number of things. It could be yelling and screaming, which is not always so healthy. It could be going for a run or a walk or doing some kind of exercise to get that energy moving and flowing. It could be writing in a journal. It could be one of my favorites that I talk about in the book is that if you get a nice thing of raw eggs and throw them in your shower, it's something amazingly cathartic about just breaking things in a safe way. And so that's the reaction. Our reaction could be protesting. Our reaction could be writing letters to local government officials. But it's not so much the reaction that changes things, it's our response. And the response is coming from what is it that actually needs to change. And so if we were disrespected, if we were violated, if we were blocked or obstructed, those are all things that are going to trigger anger and the wood element. And so you can have your reaction, but then you also have to respond to what actually triggered the anger in the first place. And we can see how those things might be totally different. If you yell and scream at someone for disrespecting you, that is not necessarily going to make them respect you. So you have to really look at the two different sides of the reaction and response to really be in alignment with the wood element.
So, what are some ways that we can show greater compassion, just not for others, but for ourselves as well?
I would say that this whole science, these seasons of the souls, all of them are really about self awareness. And that's awareness of our individual self and awareness of our collective self. Again, our place in the world. And the compassion that I find emerges from working with this medicine is that everything belongs. So there is no part of ourself that we have to discard, throw away, have shame or blame about. It's all about finding the appropriate space for whatever it is that we're thinking or we're feeling and being able to see that within the larger context of one of these elements. So, for example, I think anger is a place where we might feel guilty for being angry at someone, or maybe we yelled at someone, or and so we're carrying this guilt. And then the compassion comes from saying, oh, well, actually, that anger that I was feeling is coming from this wood element energy. It's coming from my desire to make something change. So instead of just sitting here and wallowing in the guilt or feeling over apologetic, I can honor that that emotion came to me to support me in creating change. And the same is true with all of the elements. I can honor that the fear or the anxiety that I'm feeling is really coming from a call for me to be more cautious and attentive and to move slowly. or I can honor that the grief and sadness that I'm feeling is coming from the gift of being present and honoring what I lost and also what is still here. And so I've found compassion for myself in terms of looking at these elements and the gifts that they bring and allowing myself to feel, to allow myself the full spectrum of the human emotion and the human experience, and to not judge myself because of that feeling, that to honor that that's what my heart is actually meant to do. It's meant to feel all of the things and to work with what comes up there and what's reflected there.
I know a lot of times when people, like when I'm going through a lesson, it's funny because my friends are going through the same lesson in different versions on their own. And when
Oh,
we
so
talk,
true.
it's like, oh, wow, okay, we're all kind of doing the same thing. Is there a lesson that you tend to see more so now than you have?
Well, right now we are in the season of the earth element moving into metal. And I do tend to see these seasonal signatures where as we move into one season and one element, those lessons get a little bit louder. And so right now, my peer circle, my circle of colleagues, my clients, we're all kind of wrestling with this: how do I organize my life in a way that is both fulfilling and structured so I don't feel so all over the place? So it just so happens that this is back to school season for the past couple of weeks, and we're coming out of summer, and everyone is trying to find a way to get organized and get their dinner plan together, or their when are they going to go to bed, and get those structures in place. And then as we move deeper into the fall season, I definitely see those recurring lessons of the metal element starting to emerge around honoring what we've lost, being present, taking a breath. I think the fall season in Chinese medicine is related to the lungs. And so the preciousness of now, the preciousness of each breath, sometimes it brings waves of nostalgia. So I definitely see that as the fall is starting to emerge, as those leaves turn colors and start to fall to the ground, really feeling into those lessons of the metal element.
Well, that's a really good one. I was real impressed with the grounded earth chapter because it seems not only are we just in it right now, but it seems like there's so many lessons that people can learn from.
There is. I do find that this medicine is really lifelong learning, at least it has been for me. And I love that I was able to share some of the most pertinent soul lessons that I've discovered in working with them and for myself and my clients. But there's so much more. And that's why the invitation is to really be present to nature as it's unfolding around us and inside of us, because we're each going to take different lessons from these elements as we begin to work with them, as we begin to integrate the practices. New things are going to show up for us, and we can share those lessons as well.
So I know you have a soul lesson that talks about our body as a temple. How can we start to really view our body in that way when maybe we haven't before?
It's such a it's such a practice of balance and integration, because we are both, right? We are these unlimited spiritual beings, and we're in these finite temporal bodies. And so the earth element teaches us to honor all sides of that. And in the book, I talk about practices that honor the healing for our physical body, healing for our emotional body, healing for our mental body, and then healing for our spiritual body. And that there are a wealth of practices that we find in complementary and alternative medicine, energetic medicine, biomedicine, even, that can support us at each of those layers of our being. And so the invitation that the earth element offers is to not just think about health and healing on a physical level, but to think about, okay, am I on an emotional level creating space for laughter and joy in my life? Am I creating space for emotional clarity? Am I writing in my journal? Am I talking to friends? Am I moving in through my life in a way that honors that holding space for my own inner world and my own inner thought process and my feeling body. And then similarly with the mental body, it's thinking, okay, am I seeing a therapist if I need to see a therapist? Am I reading books that are inspiring? Am I listening to inspiring radio shows and podcasts and things that keep my mind sharp and clear and elevated? Am I doing my spiritual work? Am I praying? Am I chanting? Am I meditating? Am I doing whatever it is that speaks to me as a spirit being to make sure that my spirituality feels aligned? And all of those things can be done in tandem with whatever I'm doing for my physical body. And that's really what the earth element teaches us, is that our physical body is a vessel for the spirit, and that they are both equally important, and that we can work through the energy body to create a balance that honors both sides of the human experience, the spiritual side as well as the earthly side.
And it's about time that we do that, right?
It's so about time. It's so welcoming to see that. When I first started my practice, and I would tell folks that I'm an acupuncturist and I work with flower essences, and people would kind of tilt their head to the side and say, well, what is that? And what are you doing? And now when I talk about what I do, there's so much receptivity because the complementary and alternative medicine is becoming so much more mainstream now. And I'm so grateful for that, because I really do feel like it offers a healing that we can't get if we just focus on our physical bodies, if we're just focused on how much we weigh, or what we look like, or what our heart rate is. All of those things may be important, but there's so much more to us, and I'm grateful that there's space for us to be able to see that in ourselves and in each other.
I love the figurines that you have throughout the book, and the drawings that you have.
Thank you.
What was the inspiration behind that?
I wanted the book to have images of the women that show up in my clinic, quite honestly. And I love that, they have these very unique hairstyles, they have earrings, they have lashes, there are all different body types. And that's something that I feel like has been missing in the wellness industry in terms of representation. And I wanted my book to show that, it's called In Our Element because the elements belong to all of us. And I felt that it was important that the imagery, the yoga poses, the meridians showed up on different bodies and different ethnicities, and really showed that it's not just one type of person that accesses this medicine, that it is for all of us, and that we can see ourselves in it as well. So I had a lot of fun working with an illustrator. Her name is Hollis. She was amazing at, we would get together and we would have these meetings and we'd say, okay, the Earth Woman has bantu knots and gold hoop earrings, and the wood element figurine is a woman that has locks like myself. Or, it was just a lot of fun creating these images, and then being able to bring them to life and have them live in the book as well.
I think people can really connect and relate to not only your book and the information in there, but also to the images that are there as well, because it's like, oh, some of these people look like me. This is awesome.
Right. Thank you.
Whether it's body type or hair type or lashes, whatever, but it's definitely a welcoming thing.
Oh, thank you. And we did have a lot of fun with it, and it was one of the, I would say, one of the things that was really important to me in terms of this book, this idea of representation, this idea of seeing ourselves and not necessarily seeing ourselves as it fits into a mold. Sometimes in the wellness industry, there's this kind of caricature mold of what wellness looks like. And I think it's time we shake that up a little bit. Um, we all belong to this medicine, and it belongs to all of us.
I agree with you 100% on that, and just really appreciated your book, In Our Element. Where can our listeners connect with you, Lindsay, and be part of your community and learn more about your work?
Oh, thank you for asking. The best place to reach me and to learn more is on the website, thespiritseed.org. And that is where you'll find the book, the flower essences, and a beautiful community of students and practitioners. You can jump in and take classes. You can work with some of the folks that are in their clinical training. So that's the hub of everything, the Spirit Seed. And then on social media, you can find me at Lindsay Faunt. So it's Lindsay with an A and Faunt with an F.
Well, Lindsay, thank you so much for taking the time to be on the show with us here today.
Thank you so much for having me. Thank you for spending time with my work and my book. And thank you for bringing me here. I really appreciate it.
Well, thank you, Lindsay. It has been such an honor to spend this time with you and to talk about your new book, In Our Element, using the 5 elements of soul medicine to unleash your personal power. We're going to take a moment here for a quick break, and we'll be right back after this message. I'd like to thank Jason Eastwood at Guitarfulness for sharing his inspiring music and talent with us. His music is known worldwide for cultivating atmospheres of harmony, inner peace, and clarity. Visit Jason's website at guitarfulness.com. Join his newsletter, be part of his community, and download his music. Well, we're at the end of our time today. I'd like to thank everyone for tuning in. You've been listening to Moments with Marianne, where we make every moment count.
In a single moment, your life can change. Moments with Marianne is a transformative hour that covers an endless array of topics with the best of the best. Her guests are leaders in their fields, ranging from inspirational authors, top industry leaders, and business and spiritual entrepreneurs. Each guest is gifted and a true visionary, a recognized leader in her own work, and while teaching others to develop, refocus, and grow, Marianne will bring the best guest and sometimes a special surprise. Don't miss this. You never know just which moment will change your life forever. Make sure to tune in and visit momentswithmarianne.com for more information.